brings us on to the next sort of phase of what we want to talk about. So we just, if you're just tuning in to part two here, then we've just talked about loneliness and fear, and maybe the sort of isolation. So if you are just watching this part, maybe you want to go back, but I won't dwell on that too long, because if you're listening to this, you will have just heard all of that. And we're going to talk about feeding the hungry now, and sort of the food situation that this pandemic has brought into even starker relief, because the whole, in the UK where we're talking from, the whole food bank situation has been something that's really become enormous over the last decade. I think I read in something like in 2004 there was like 2 food banks or something, and there's like 2,000 now or something. I mean, don't quote me on that, but it's something like that anyway. So it's not, we want to sit here and say, oh yeah, the food issue and the hunger issues just come about because of the pandemic, but it's certainly been exacerbated by it. And the people, parents and single people and anyone that might have lost their job and is wondering about how to feed themselves, it's not like their job is just going to come back straight away, if ever, as soon as there's a vaccine. This is to some extent changed. It would have changed a lot of individuals' lives and the pathways of their lives forever. And it's changed societally. It's changed, this whole sort of chains and types of industry that may or may not survive this thing and come back. Equally, there's probably some things that have arisen that otherwise wouldn't have. Not least, who'd heard of Zoom 9 months ago?
Yeah.
Food. Talk about food and hunger.
So one of the other things that will probably be happening in the new normal, at least for a while, relates to food security, which is the shorthand way of saying, are people going hungry? Are people experiencing food deprivation? And we already had an issue in the UK with a certain amount of malnutrition amongst a quota of children. We now have a situation where a lot of people who are on 0 hours contracts suddenly find themselves in a food insecurity situation. We have a situation where if you're on 80% of your normal wage, things might be getting a bit tight. We have a situation where people are being made redundant and are having to live on a very basic income, but their whole financial scheme was built around on living on more. And so this is a real issue, and we don't quite know how it will play out. If there's problems with the whole Brexit situation, there could be short-term food shortages to do with fresh produce and all of those kind of things. So in the light of that, we then say, what does the Christian community do? Well, there's a couple of things. One is shorthand, food security in the Bible. Let's just go through that for the next 2 minutes. When they're being told how to sort their fields out and how to grow their food in the Torah, the ancient Hebrews are instructed to leave food at the side of the fields and to always leave something for those who might be in some kind of economically deprived situation. When they go up to Jerusalem for their festivals, they're told to take food for people who haven't got land to grow it on. And land use and land ownership, subject we could talk about all day in terms of world politics, even now. And then as you go on through the scriptures, the prophets are like, why are these people being sold? Why are the weights being slanted so they don't get their full value? Why? And so food security, major issue, right into Jesus's day. So when you think of Jesus's day, a lot of people have stopped being landowners, farm owners. They were tenant farmers, slightly at the mercy of whoever the landholder was. A lot of them weren't even tenant farmers. They were day laborers. And so food security was a real issue. And in the book of Acts, it said that they all ate together and they had things in common. And part of this related to the fact that a lot of your food support was going to come from your kinship group, your family. And if you had taken hold of this new expression of Judaism that was Christianity, you might have been alienated from your family. So how are you going to live? Jesus fed the 5,000 and at various other times spoke into people's food insecurity. The widow of Nain, whose son Jesus raised from the dead. We could just look at that and say, oh, it was a miracle, wonderful thing. God raises people from the dead through Jesus. But there's also an issue about her personal, financial and food security issues. So this is an issue on God's heart. The widow of Nain, she lost her husband, now she's lost her son. How is she going to survive? And Ben's already mentioned, the food bank situation and the very high tempo of work that they've done before the coronavirus. If you are in our town, there is a project that feeds the homeless, but since March, they've also been feeding the 0 hours, the people who got into debt because of the current situation.
A lot of people that work in hotels where the hotels just have either not opened or, nobody's coming to them, or, the owners of the hotels have just given up, basically.
Yeah. And so as Christians, one of the things that, when we raise our head and say, right, what would be God's intent in the new normal? Our local Matthew 25 project, which feeds homeless people, has kind of basically gone up 400% because of the other people that they're feeding. And if the situation worsened or Brexit had a negative impact on food imports, one of the things that we're investigating is how many of the churches have kitchens that could act as another version of that project in Eastbourne and bring the supply to those in a desperate situation much closer to where they live. And so if you're listening and you're thinking, so what if there is food insecurity? Many of us won't experience it, but there will be hundreds, thousands around us who might. And when you get a bad diet, it starts to affect everything else. So in the new normal, there may be food insecurity. And I think the call of God has always been to respond to people's need at the sharp end in very practical ways. In Psalm 23, it says, Lord's my shepherd, I shall not want. And that phrase, I shall not want, is pregnant with this idea of food security. So I'd really encourage you, if you're listening today, to think about how you could help as a church, probably as an institution, with issues around food insecurity. The food bank in our town has distribution points. So it could be something just like administrative like that, but it makes a huge change. It's a huge help for people. You're not having to pack the boxes or source the food. You're just part of the distribution context. You might have the ability to create a kitchen if the situation becomes more difficult, which could help feed your community. But let's be thinking about the food security issues that might exist in the new normal, at least for a while.
Yeah. As we've been saying, even in the best case scenarios, industries like hospitality and hotels and airlines and all of them are saying, we're not expecting it to be back to 2019 levels until 2023 or 2024. And, all of this has a sort of ripple effect. And so, it's not something, it's not going away in a hurry. And the aftermath of this whole thing, not that we've even got to the aftermath point yet, we're still right in the epicenter of it. So do you think that brings us to a close on the food.
Yep.
The food stuff. Okay.